The 6 a.m. alarm cuts through the silence like a blade. Mark hits the snooze button, his arm heavy, limbs resisting the command to move. The room is still dark, but the day is already demanding payment. He drags his feet across the floor, the cold tile biting into his soles. Every movement is a chore. Coffee brewed in a rush, a bag grabbed from the counter, the door locked behind him. He steps out into the gray pre-dawn air. By 7:15, he is on the platform, merging into the river of bodies heading toward the city. Around him, hundreds of commuters stand shoulder to shoulder, their faces washed out by the blue light of mobile screens. No one speaks. The air is stagnant, recycled through 100 lungs. Eyes are glazed, fixed on pixels, avoiding the reality of the commute. He finds a sliver of space near the sliding doors and grips the metal pole. It is cold, slick, with the residue of 1,000 hands. The train jolts forward, and the crowd sways in unison, a mass of trapped momentum. Mark stares at his own reflection in the window, his expression mirroring the hollow fatigue of the strangers pressed against his back. By noon, the office air is stale, thick with the hum of processors and the distant, rhythmic tap of keys. Mark sits at his station, eyes burning from hours of staring at spreadsheets. The cells on his screen are rows of numbers that never seem to add up to anything more than survival. He leans back, his spine cracking, and looks at the wall of cubicles. Each one holds another person mirroring his posture, another person following the same path. A heavy folder lands on his desk with a sharp thud. His manager stands over him, tapping a watch. "I need this data analyzed and the report filed by 5. No exceptions." Mark looks at the clock. It is already 12:15. He feels the walls of his cubicle tighten, the space around him shrinking. He realizes this is the path he chose. Study hard, pass the exams, climb the ladder. But the ladder is leaning against a wall that never ends. He types, the cursor blinking in a steady, taunting pulse. Each click is a minute of his life, traded for a projection that will be obsolete by tomorrow. He is not building a future. He is maintaining a machine that keeps him locked in place. The notification pings on his phone at midnight. The direct deposit arrives. Mark opens the banking application, his pulse quickening with the habitual hope of a surplus. He watches the number tick upward, a momentary flicker of relief. Then, the real-time debits begin to carve it away. Rent pulls the largest chunk, leaving a jagged gap. The student loan interest follows, a relentless, automated extraction. Credit card minimums swallow the remainder. In less than 3 minutes, the balance returns to the same baseline it held the month before. He stares at the screen, tapping the refresh icon as if a second check might change the total. It does not. He pulls out a notepad and begins to scribble, adding up the hours he logged this month against the remaining digits. The math is brutal. He is working more hours, taking on more tasks, yet the net result remains static. He looks at his hands, cramped from hours of typing, and realizes they have produced nothing of his own. He is running at full speed on a treadmill that is bolted to the floor. The harder he pushes, the faster the belt moves, but he is not gaining an inch of ground. He is not building wealth. He is simply paying for the privilege of existing in the system for another 30 days. Mark looks out the window at the city streets. Thousands of people move in synchronized patterns, clutching devices and bags, all of them fueling the engine. The system does not want entrepreneurs. It wants consumers. It is a massive, hungry mechanism designed to harvest human time and convert it into paper currency. And the trap is simple. The moment that money hits the account, the system offers 1,000 ways to turn it into things that lose value the second they are touched. A new phone that slows down in a year. A vehicle that sheds half its worth the moment it leaves the lot. He watches a delivery truck unload crates of goods onto the sidewalk. Each box represents someone else's labor, someone else's finite hours, now locked into objects that will end up in a landfill. The logic is circular and hollow. You trade your life force for currency, then trade that currency for items that depreciate, ensuring you must return to the office to trade more of your life. He realizes he is not a participant in an economy. he is a fuel source. The system thrives because it treats human output as a finite resource to be consumed, rather than an asset to be invested. He is trapped in the role of the buyer, while the owners of the machine hold the levers. He has been playing a game where the rules are written to ensure he never wins. Consider two people who crossed the same threshold on the same Monday morning, Sarah and Leo. They joined the same firm, sat at desks in the same department, and signed contracts for identical salaries. To an outside observer, they were indistinguishable. They possessed the same degree, the same amount of experience, and the same number of hours in their daily schedule. Yet, the invisible trajectory of their lives began to bend the moment that first paycheck cleared. The firm deposited the exact same sum into both of their accounts. It was a blank slate, a neutral point of origin. But their responses to that capital were polar opposites. One saw money as a signal for the present, a tool to validate her place in the hierarchy. The other saw money as a seed, a dormant force waiting to be planted. They were standing on the same starting line, looking at the same horizon, but their internal maps were already drawing different destinations. One began building a foundation of assets, while the other began constructing a facade of success. This was the moment the divergence began. In the quiet of their separate lives, the quietest of decisions, where to put the first dollar, would eventually dictate the shape of their entire futures. The experiment had begun, and the results were already being written in the ledger of their daily choices. Sarah looked at the digits in her bank account and saw only potential, not for growth, but for projection. Within weeks, the logic of the firm demanded she show her rank. She walked into a dealership and signed the documents for a luxury vehicle. The monthly payment was substantial, a heavy anchor attached to her paycheck before she even walked through the office doors. She drove the machine to work, feeling the smooth leather against her palms and the weight of the engine beneath her foot. It was a signal to her peers, a visible marker that she had arrived. She felt the rush of the upgrade, the immediate validation of being seen in the right seat. But the math of the loan was relentless. Every month, a massive chunk of her earnings vanished into interest and principal, leaving her with nothing to move into assets. She had traded her liquid capital for a depreciating metal shell. The car sat in the parking lot, losing value while she spent 10 hours a day at her desk to pay for the privilege of owning it. She became a prisoner of her own signal. To keep the status, she had to keep the job, regardless of the stress or the lack of autonomy. She was no longer working for her own future. She was working to service the debt she had invited into her life. Leo viewed the same paycheck not as an invitation to consume, but as a strategic resource. While his peers moved toward high-visibility purchases, Leo looked for quiet efficiency. He opted for a sedan that had long since finished its steepest depreciation curve, choosing reliability over the allure of a new model. He moved into an apartment that served his needs without draining his accounts, ignoring the unspoken social pressure to upgrade his environment alongside his title. Every month, the surplus cash that others funneled into interest-bearing debt, Leo channeled elsewhere. He searched for small business shares, income-generating equity, and assets that required no constant upkeep. He was not interested in how his life looked to an observer in the parking lot. He was obsessed with what his capital could produce in the dark. He treated his bank balance as a tool to be sharpened, not a prize to be displayed. While the office buzzed with conversations about new leases and luxury upgrades, Leo kept his focus on the ledger. He knew that the cost of immediate comfort was a reduction in future options. By sacrificing the present display of success, he was purchasing something far more durable: the ability to exist without the constant, grinding pressure of a paycheck-to-paycheck existence. He was building his own floor, brick by brick, while the rest of the world was still playing with the paint. Years drifted by in a blur of repetitive office cycles. For Sarah, the cycle remained unchanged. The alarm at dawn, the commute, the performance reviews, and the relentless pressure to maintain her chosen lifestyle. Her luxury vehicle, once a source of pride, began to show the wear of daily use, its market value plummeting while the interest on her debt remained fixed. She was still running in place, her salary barely covering the cost of the status she had purchased years ago. Meanwhile, Leo lived in the quiet zone of compounding. He remained out of the public eye, his life devoid of flashy milestones. Every spare dollar he earned moved automatically into his accounts, buying equity in businesses that operated miles away from his desk. He did not talk about his investments. He did not showcase his progress. He simply watched the numbers. Where Sarah saw a mounting list of bills, Leo saw a growing network of machines that generated cash without his direct supervision. The gap between them widened in silence. Sarah was working harder to pay for the past, while Leo was working to fund a future that required less and less of his physical labor. One was a consumer of time, the other was an owner of systems. The divergence was no longer just a choice. It was a reality etched into their bank statements. 10 years had passed, and the trajectory of their lives had reached a definitive point of divergence. The calendar marked a decade, but the reality for Sarah and Leo was measured in freedom rather than days. Sarah stood at the same desk, her energy consumed by the constant need to satisfy creditors and maintain her position. Her life had become a series of fixed obligations that demanded her presence every single morning. She was a high-functioning component of a machine she did not control. In contrast, Leo had transitioned into the role of an operator. His decade of silent, disciplined reinvestment had shifted the power dynamic of his life. He no longer traded his hours for the ability to exist. The assets he had methodically gathered over the years now formed a self-sustaining foundation. He looked at his portfolio not as a savings account, but as an engine that functioned independently of his physical input. Where Sarah felt the crushing weight of a paycheck-to-paycheck cycle, Leo felt the quiet momentum of compound interest. The 10-year mark proved that wealth was not a product of effort alone, but a result of ownership. One lived in a state of dependency, while the other had built a machine that rendered his absence irrelevant to his survival. The gap between them was now an unbridgeable canyon of choice. For Sarah, the morning alarm had become an instrument of dread. At 6 a.m., she did not wake with purpose. She woke with a pulse of adrenaline, checking her email before her feet even touched the floor. Every day was a high-stakes calculation. One slip in performance, one negative review from her manager, and the entire structure of her life risked immediate collapse. She maintained a high-status appearance, but behind the scenes, her bank account was a sieve. The debt from her early choices acted as a tether, pulling her back to the office desk regardless of her fatigue or the toxic atmosphere. She lived in a state of hypervigilance. During meetings, she did not contribute ideas. She measured the political wins, terrified of being the first name on a redundancy list. She was trapped in a cage of her own making, where the bars were built from loan payments and the maintenance of an image she no longer even enjoyed. The office was no longer a place of career growth. It was a lifeboat she could not afford to abandon. Every hour spent working was not for her future, but for the preservation of a present that demanded her total, fearful compliance. Leo woke at his own pace, the sun already high enough to warm the floor. There was no alarm. There was no desperate scramble to reach a train platform. He sat at a desk in the corner of his study, the room quiet, save for the rhythmic tap of keys. His phone screen displayed a dashboard of incoming revenue, a steady pulse of data generated by systems he had spent years constructing. While the world rushed toward a single hour, he adjusted the flow of a distribution channel he owned. He did not analyze his hourly output. He audited the equity. He spent his morning identifying bottlenecks in a logistics network, looking for ways to leverage technology to multiply the output without increasing his own physical labor. This was the shift. He was no longer a gear in a machine owned by others. He was the architect of the machine itself. He watched the numbers climb not because he pushed harder, but because the system he built was designed to compound. He closed the laptop, poured coffee, and looked out the window. He was free to choose his next move, because his income no longer required his direct, hourly presence to survive. The illusion of success is a paycheck with an extra zero. Many believe that increasing their income solves the problem, yet they fail to see the leak in the bucket. A worker brings home a higher salary and immediately increases their lifestyle costs to match. They trade more of their limited hours for items that lose value the moment they are purchased. This is the fundamental flaw of the worker logic. They view their income as a reward for effort, rather than a resource that must be converted into something that functions independently. The math is brutal. If you earn more but spend it on depreciating assets, you are merely running faster on a treadmill that never stops. The system thrives on this cycle. It encourages the pursuit of higher wages because it knows those wages will flow right back into the machine. You are not building a foundation, you are building a faster way to exhaustion. The realization hits like a cold weight. You can spend your entire life working for money, yet never have money working for you. Without the conversion to cash-flowing assets, that paycheck is not a path to freedom. It is a golden tether, keeping you firmly planted in the very system you think you are escaping. The pivot is not in your skills, it is in your identity. Most professionals define their worth by the hours they log, believing that more time equals more value. This is the mindset of the worker. It is a dead end. Operators do not obsess over hourly wages. They look at the clock and see a constraint, not a metric of success. They stop asking what their time is worth and start asking what they own. Obsession with equity is the catalyst for the shift. When you move your focus from the paycheck to the asset, the entire professional landscape changes. You no longer see a job description as a destiny. You see it as a limited trade of your finite life. An operator looks at a business and calculates how to own a piece of that value. They strip away the desire for immediate comfort and replace it with the hunger for long-term control. This is not about working harder. It is about working on the right side of the equation. You either build the machine or you are the fuel that powers it. The choice is made every single day, in every single decision to prioritize equity over income. Stop counting your hours. Start counting your ownership. The professional identity that served you yesterday is the very anchor holding you back today. Once you claim ownership, you must master the force multiplier. Operators do not settle for individual effort because individual effort has a hard ceiling. They look at technology not as a tool for speed, but as a lever for scale. If you are still using your hands and your hours to produce output, you are competing against machines that never sleep. That is a losing game. The operator builds systems that multiply their reach without requiring their direct presence. They look at a business and find the distribution channel. They automate the processes that drain time and amplify the parts that create value. They own the software, the platform, or the network that connects the product to the market. This is the shift from linear growth to exponential impact. You are no longer one person selling one unit of labor. You are the architect of a system that serves thousands while you are elsewhere. It requires a cold, clinical assessment of every task. If it can be coded, automated, or outsourced, it must be. You strip away the manual labor to focus entirely on the design of the machine. The goal is to detach your physical presence from your output. When technology becomes your engine, your capacity for value creation is no longer bound by your heartbeat. It is bound only by the reach of your system. Now, observe the math of compounding. It is the silent engine that turns small, consistent inputs into massive, irreversible outcomes. Most view wealth as a pile of cash, but the operator views it as a biological process. You plant a seed today. It is small. It is invisible to the casual observer. You nurture it with patience, reinvesting every ounce of output back into the system. You do not withdraw. You do not consume the harvest before the roots have taken hold. You feed the machine. Month after month, the system processes your initial input and adds a fraction of growth. At first, the change is imperceptible, but then the curve bends. The system begins to produce its own energy. It gains momentum that no longer relies on your constant manual intervention. A small seed becomes a sapling, then a forest, then an empire that functions while you sleep. The math does not care about your intensity or your fatigue. It only cares about the duration of the cycle, and the consistency of the reinvestment. You are building a self-sustaining organism of value. It does not look like a paycheck. It looks like a structure that exists independently of your physical presence. This is the difference between surviving on a wage and owning a machine that generates reality. Most people walk away from their systems exactly when the real work begins. They look at the flat line of the initial progress and conclude the machine is broken. They see no immediate return on their input, so they dismantle the structure and go back to trading hours for wages. They mistake the long, horizontal phase for a failure. They do not understand the exponential curve. During those silent years, the operator is not idle. They are refining the internal components of their system, removing friction, and increasing the efficiency of every cycle. The growth is happening, but it is happening beneath the surface, hidden from the public view. It is a period of intense, quiet construction. There are no accolades. There are no external markers of progress. It is just the operator, the machine, and the data. They build in total silence because they know that once the curve hits the inflection point, the growth will become vertical. It will escape the reach of linear effort. It will move beyond their ability to control it. The operator waits for this moment with absolute certainty. They do not quit because they know that the lack of results today is simply the price of the explosion that is coming tomorrow. They hold the line, they reinvest, and they let the math do the heavy lifting. Then, the divergence occurs. It is not a gradual shift anymore. It is a violent tearing of reality. On one side, the worker remains anchored to the clock, repeating the same cycle of labor, consumption, and exhaustion. Every year is a replica of the last, defined by the same limits, the same fatigue, and the same reliance on a paycheck that never quite covers the horizon. On the other side, the operator has crossed the threshold. The assets they built now pull them forward with a momentum that ignores the human need for rest. Look at the distance between them. It is no longer a gap of income or status. It is a difference in existence. The worker stares across the divide, seeing a world where time is no longer a currency to be traded, but a resource to be directed. The canyon has opened wide, deep, and final. It is an unbridgeable space where one path leads to the eternal maintenance of survival, while the other leads to the total ownership of output. You can see the worker reaching for the other side, but the bridge has long since dissolved into the history of their own choices. The operator stands on the far edge, silent, observing the mechanics of a world that no longer requires their physical presence to function. The divide is absolute. The most dangerous lie you were ever told is that effort equals wealth. It is a fairy tale designed to keep the engine running. Look at the numbers. Look at the reality of the daily grind. Hard work does not lead to ownership. Hard work leads to more work. It leads to survival. It keeps you fed, housed, and just barely solvent enough to show up again on Monday morning. You have been taught to equate sweat with success, but that is a trap. You are trading your finite hours for paper currency that loses value every single day. The system does not reward your persistence. It consumes it. It thrives on your exhaustion. If effort were the true currency of prosperity, every laborer would be a billionaire. But they are not. They are tired. They are trapped in a cycle where the output of their labor is captured by the machine, while they receive only the scraps required to continue the next cycle. You are working harder than ever, yet your bank balance remains flat. This is not a failure of your character, it is a feature of the system. You are running on a treadmill that is bolted to the floor. You move, you strain, you push, but you go nowhere. The myth is broken. The effort you provide only buys you another day of the same struggle. Now, stand still. The realization of the lie is not the end. It is the necessary demolition of a faulty foundation. If the old path is a dead end, you must stop walking it. True freedom does not arrive through more intensity. It does not come from working harder or faster. It begins the moment you stop asking, "How can I work more?" and start asking, "What system can I own? This is the pivot point. You must stop viewing your intellect as a tool for someone else's machine and start using it to construct your own. The question changes everything. Instead of looking for a task to complete, look for a process to automate. Instead of seeking a wage, seek equity. You are no longer a cog in a system that thrives on your depletion. You are the architect of a new reality. The shift is not about physical output. It is about logical design. Ask yourself, what produces value while you sleep? What scales without your manual intervention? The moment you stop trading your life for a paycheck is the moment you reclaim your time. This is the transition from a worker to an operator. It requires silence, planning, and the courage to build in the shadows while the world remains distracted by the grind. Your intellect is the lever. Use it. Stop trading your life for a paycheck. It is an uneven exchange that you will never win. Every hour you sell is an hour you can never repurchase, and that is a deficit no salary can cover. You must stop waiting for permission to thrive. Start building the machine that pays you for your intellect, not your stamina. Your time is finite. It ticks away with every breath. But your systems, if built correctly, are not. They run without you. They produce value while you are absent. They scale when you sleep. This is the difference between a life of survival and a life of leverage. The shift begins today. Take the inventory of your skills. Identify the bottleneck in your industry. Design the process that removes the friction, then own the distribution of that solution. Do not look for comfort. Look for equity. Do not look for a boss. Look for a market. The world is full of workers, but it is starving for operators. You have the blueprint. You have the logic. Now, you have the duty to act. Close the spreadsheets. Turn off the noise. Build the machine. Your freedom is waiting on the other side of the work you have been avoiding. Start now.